Speaking recently while touring coal development projects in Hwange, President Emmerson Mnangagwa emphasized that Zimbabwe would turn its economy around using resources over which it has sovereign control and ownership. That is the land and its minerals. With respect to the land, the government has come up with an ambitious program to achieve food self-sufficiency by 2023 and an $8 billion agriculture economy by 2025. In this one-on-one discussion with the Perm for Agriculture, Dr. John Basera, we try to find out how the government hopes to achieve within 2 years what has proved difficult over the past 10 to 15 years. Dr. Basera, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us, and of course, in line with the COVID guidelines, we are maintaining the recommended distance between ourselves. I want to begin this discussion on a somber but hopefully inspirational note. You will remember that when the President launched this plan a few days, well, last week I think, he referred to the role played by the late national hero and former Agriculture Minister, Comrade Perm, in terms of coming up with this plan. Now, as somebody who worked very closely with him, can you put that contribution and legacy by Comrade Shiri into perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gilbert, for coming around. Obviously, I would say that it was a big loss to Zim agriculture. It was a big loss to the nation at large. And again, a big loss to his province, that is Mashonaland Central, as well as Mashonaland East. Comrade Perm was a practical man. He was a strategist par excellence. He was not an agriculturalist, but we tried as a team, we tried to turn him into an agriculturalist and a strategist for agriculture for that matter. So I would say it will never be the same again without him, but obviously we will try our best because he left a legacy of hard work, a legacy of strategy, a legacy of being practical. He was a practical man. So yes, we will try our best so that we finish whatever projects we were targeting to achieve. But more importantly, I remember vividly, we met His Excellence. I think that was 2 months after my appointment. And His Excellence gave us a target, a task, a special task, I should say. We should not import even a single pip, a single grain of soybean, a single grain of wheat, a single grain of maize, more importantly, which are very, very critical, and strategic crops. They are staple crops in our food basket. So we were equal to the task. And I remember still that usually our day would start at 7:30 and ends around 9 or 10 p.m. And usually we'll be discussing strategies. And in fact, one night, I think it was around 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. somewhere there, we asked ourselves, especially after that meeting with His Excellence, that Comrade Shiri, Comrade Basera, what should we do so that we are able to attain as by the task we were given by His Excellence? That's when we crafted the Agriculture Recovery Plan, as well as the Livestock Growth Plan. So that was our relationship. So he left a legacy of strategy, a legacy of hard work, a legacy of implementation, more importantly.
Because agriculture is the backbone of the economy's life.
Yeah, indeed. It is a backbone of the economy in terms of contribution to the national GDP. Remember, at the moment, it contributes between 12 and 15%. And of course, our targets is to say by year 2023, 2025, it should be contributing over 20% to national GDP. Employment creation, it creates employment, formal employment, by the way, to the tune of around 33, 35%, and then 67 to 70% of employment in general, formal and informal, direct and indirect. The agriculture sector also supplies 63% or over 63% of the raw materials to the industry. So we can't talk of industrial growth or industrial revolution 5.0 without talking agriculture revolution or agriculture transformation.
The President always says that the past is important insofar as we can learn from it. So we want to look a bit at where we are coming from. And indicatively, the plan is called Agriculture Recovery Plan. My sense is you don't recover from a good place. Some people want to describe the past few years as a crisis, if not a disaster, in terms of agricultural productivity and this contribution to the economy. In your view, what can we learn from the past 10 to 15 years?
Remember, we are in a revolution. After a land reform, which took place starting the year 2000. There was some shifts in terms of land ownership. We used to have the former white farmers, the former farmers. We now have newly resettled farmers. So it's a process. And by the way, Rome wasn't built in a day. So it's a process and it's a learning curve. So yes, there's always a lot of things to learn, especially to do with climate change adaptation. Climate change has been hitting us hard. And in fact, we did some time series analysis, some deeper analysis on the effects of climate change on the agriculture subsector. And tell you what, Gilbert, agriculture is vulnerable to climate change. And climate change hasn't been sparing us for the past 20 years or so, since we undertook the much needed land reform. So whenever we are hit, say, by a drought, then there's a significant spike down in terms of agriculture growth, in terms of agriculture contribution to GDP and ultimately to the national GDP. So it means, and it is apparent, that we have to learn from that, not really crisis, but a learning curve, I should say, for the past 20 years, and try to climate-proof our agriculture, which I said is vulnerable to climate change. So that is the reason why we are rolling out this plan. And of course, more specifically, one of the key tenets to that, the lens, which we have learned in the past 20 years, is that we need to upscale our game in terms of irrigation rehab and development. That is the reason why it is a key component and a key flagship in the agriculture recovery plan.
The plan is to achieve food security and self-sufficiency by 2023 and an $8 billion agriculture economy by 2025. That is very, very ambitious within 2 to 3 years. Is it realistic? Is it achievable?
Well, I should say that it's practically ambitious. Let me say so. Why? Because the key components, and in fact the key touch points, the key strategic interventions which we are proposing are very, very practical. And they are based on our own resources, utilizing our own resources. Obviously based on, again, private sector participation, creating a conducive environment so that the private sector can also put their skin in the game. So I should say it's a practical plan, and more importantly, in developing the plan, it was kind of participatory in nature. Why? Because we had everybody on board. Remember, the number one rule for an implementable strategy or plan is not to leave anyone behind. So we were working with the private sector, the financial services institutions, the leadership from the provinces, the traditional leadership, and so on and so on, the farmers themselves, and so on and so on. So there's that total some buy-in in all the interventions, in all the strategic touch points in the recovery plan as well as in the livestock growth plan. So no one was left behind. So it's very, very easy to roll it out. It's very, very easy to implement because there's that total some buy-in. There's extreme ownership from everybody, from the private sector, from us, the government, in terms of setting the policy tone, creating the conducive environment so that farmers can be able to flourish, so that the private sector can be able to flourish and invest in agriculture, in the agriculture sector, so that, and ultimately, we put agriculture, and more importantly, at the center stage of achieving and attaining Vision 2030 even much earlier.
Yeah. The plan itself has 8 to 9 tenets. Would you please just briefly outline what these tenets entail?
Yeah, Gilbert, basically we do have, His Excellency launched 3 documents or 3 plans. The first one is the mega blueprint, which is called the Agriculture and Food Systems Transformation Strategy. And it's supported by 2 anchor blueprints, 2 anchor sub-blueprints. Namely, number 1 is the Agriculture Recovery Plan. The Agriculture Recovery Plan, its strategic intention is to reverse the current trends in the food production subsector. Remember, food productivity, maize productivity, soybean productivity, wheat productivity and production has been kind of on a downward trend. If not, it was stagnating. It was not growing, rather. So we would need to reverse those current trends. And of course, some of them are induced by climate change. Yes, climate change is a reality. And the second anchor blueprint in support of that transformation strategy is obviously the livestock growth plan. Why livestock? Livestock is at the center in terms of agriculture. Yes, agriculture is central to our economy, but livestock is central to agriculture, more importantly. Remember, for example, let me just give you a specific example. The national head, we have a national head of about 5.5 million, and 90% of which belongs to the smallholder sector. So you can imagine its impacts, the livestock sector, its impacts on the livelihoods of the general populace. So that's the reason why we came up with that document, the livestock growth plan, so that we see some growth in terms of the national head, we see some growth in terms of the dairy sector, we see some growth in terms of climate change adaptation by adopting small stocks, small livestock. So small livestock, we are looking at goats, we are looking at sheep, those that can even fura even in a room without grass. So we were looking at those in terms of climate proofing the agriculture sector, so that at least it takes that center stage in terms of economic recovery and economic growth. But looking at the key touch points, especially in the agriculture recovery plan, number one, we obviously have about 3 or 4 flagships and other supporting flagships or supporting programs. So number one, we have obviously a remodeled Command Agriculture. Remember, according to the Transitional Stabilization Program, one of its dictates is to crowd in the participation of private sector, especially the financial services sector, in terms of funding agriculture. So it's no longer kind of government's baby to support such programs like Command Agriculture Program. Yes, government will create the conducive environment, the framework, as well as the preconditions for the private sector to participate. But more importantly, it will be administered through financial services institutions. That's very, very smart, especially in terms of those programs being sustainable, being viable, and where we have, upscaled or upped recoveries. And these programs will be run on a cost recovery basis. So I should say that farmers, there's no more free lunch. It's now kind of business as unusual, and the private sector or the financial services sector will be able to own land to our farmers at some concessionary and appropriate interest rates, so that our farmers can be able to grow. So that's key touch point number one, Gilbert. Otherwise, key touch point number 2 is a climate-proofed presidential input scheme, now popularly known as Pfumvudza. I know in the corridors they nickname me Pfumvudza, Mr. Pfumvudza or Nzarayapera. That's it, but well, I would like to dedicate that to the late Honorable Minister Shiri. So on the climate-proofed presidential input scheme, that is the Pfumvudza, I should say that that one is our flagship. It's our winner. Why? We are targeting to support over 2 million farmers. Initially, our target was 1.8 million, but now it's 2 million farmers. So now, each farmer must be is supported with a standardized input package to produce 1 metric ton of cereal and then 200 kilos of oil seeds. So if you do your quick maths, more fundamentally, if you do your quick maths, 2 million households multiplied by 1 ton, that gives you 2 million metric tons. What is our national requirement? Our national requirement is 2.2 million. So it means through that flagship climate-proofed presidential input scheme program, we are aiming to achieve at least 85–90% of our national requirement through one program. So, and of course, the Pfumvudza concept, or the presidential input scheme, the remodeled presidential input scheme, or the climate-proofed presidential input scheme, entails adopting all the principles, and religiously, by the way, Gilbert, all the principles of conservation agriculture. So we are looking at minimum soil disturbance, we are looking at hauling out. That's the reason why that's what we call the minimum soil disturbance. And it's one of the key principles in terms of adopting conservation agriculture. We are also looking at mulching. If you see farmers edu achitema uswa wachiunganidza majanga and so on, akusikupenga bodo is actually one of the key principles in terms of adopting conservation agriculture. So now the mulch will act as a blanket cover. Remember, it has no worries of munda, and then it conserves the moisture. It creates a moisture bank. And then that moisture bank, farmers in terms of adapting to mid-season dry spells as well as to terminal droughts. Because climate change is a reality. As much as this season, our Met, I think they are forecasting normal to above normal, but climate change is a reality. You may never know. The mid-season dry spells or the terminal droughts can still maybe come. So we need to make sure that we climate-proof our programs. But otherwise, and more importantly, another key touch point in the Agriculture Recovery Plan, Gilbert, is that the participation of private sector. All the private sector off-takers of agricultural commodities, they are now compelled to produce at least 40% of their requirements locally through backward integration. We are looking at contract farming, we are looking at corporate farming, we are looking at JVs or joint ventures and so forth and so forth. I don't think it's viable for a business. I'm coming from the private sector. It's not viable for a business to enter into a financial year without knowing where the source of its raw material is. You can't say I'm entering into a financial year trusting that GMB will supply me with grain. No. Well, I should say it's unacceptable. The private sector should put their skin in the game, participate, support farmers through contract farming platforms and all the other platforms like corporate farming and so forth and so forth. Let me just mention the fourth or the fifth flagship is obviously irrigation development. Like I said, we are the most dammed country per square kilometer in Africa. Nobody beats us on that. In terms of our dams, in terms of the flowing rivers, in terms of the underground water, and so forth and so forth. We are the most in terms of that aspect per unit square kilometer. So now we need to harness that comparative advantage into a competitive advantage. And we need to harness our resources so that we climate-proof the food production subsector as well as agriculture sector, more importantly. So now we are rolling out quite a number of programs in terms of climate-proofing our agriculture. And of course, centered at two levels. Level number one is the quick fix. Remember, we have our dams or our water bodies have potential to irrigate over 2 million hectares. That's potential. But alas, Gilbert, we don't eat potential. We have to harness that potential into an advantage, right? So now we are rolling out the quick fix approach where we want to rehabilitate over 45,000 hectares of area with non-functional irrigation infrastructure. Remember, so out of the 2 million potential, at the moment, currently, we are irrigating about 175,000 hectares. That's about, I think, about 4%. Yeah, and then, of course, area with irrigation infrastructure, you are looking at around 216 to 220,000 hectares. So now it means about 45,000 hectares is non-functional. There's infrastructure, but it's non-functional. So as a law hanger, we would need to put that into use. That's why we have that quick fix approach. So we are rolling out a number of programs under the quick fix approach or the rehab scheme, the marker resources, the SEP, that is the smallholder irrigation revitalization program, which is being supported by IFAD, international agents, and thanks to engagements and the re-engagement efforts by His Excellence and the government of Zimbabwe. So we are receiving some support from international organizations like IFAD. So that's to do with the quick fix approach, because we would want to put to use the 45,000 non-functional irrigation. But the full kit approach now is about harnessing the existing water bodies and then put in some new irrigation infrastructure, that is the pipelines, the piping and so on, the conveyance system, as well as modern irrigation systems, like especially the center pivots for the A2 farmers, for the commercial side, subsector, as well as drip irrigation for the smallholder sector, overhead irrigation, and so forth and so forth.
PS, that's a huge leap, the target you have between now and 2023 in terms of irrigation. Is the funding there to rebuild this irrigation infrastructure and establish new facilities?
Gilbert, that's a fundamental question. Like I said, we are crowding in the participation of private sector. So everybody has to put their skin in the game, especially in terms of reducing our agriculture's vulnerability to climate change. So we are working with a number of financial services institutions. We are working with CBZ. We are working with all the other banks, Agribank. Agribank, they are administering a program called Pet Stock Scheme, which is targeting to put 10,000 hectares. And Gilbert, these are not wishful plans. They are practical plans, and a lot of things are happening. I can report that so far, I think about 8 center pivots have been erected, and another 8 have been shipped into the country, ready to be erected and then to be installed under the pet stock scheme, to the tune, I think, of over 8,000 hectares. So that's 8,000 in the bag already. Going to Maka Resources, 80,000 hectare facility. We are dealing with CBZ, and CBZ will be administering that scheme, as well as other financial services institutions. So we are saying we need to install about 80,000 hectares in terms of rehab, in terms of the full kit approaches, 80,000 hectares in the next 3 years. Let me report that so far, works have already started in terms of installing the first 10%, that is about 8,000 hectares. So these are not wishful thinking. A lot of things are happening. Let me go back to, or let me go to another program, the SEP. I just want to report that a lot is still happening in terms of irrigation schemes revitalization program, as co-supported by the government of Zimbabwe, as well as by IFAD under a structured scheme. So the target is to install and to rehabilitate about 7,000 hectares, and I can report that over 1,000 hectares have been now been revitalized. Now we're also working on in terms of climate proofing. I just want to show you that these are not wishful thinking. In terms of climate proofing, we are even building more dams. We are the most dammed country, but I mean, anything which is not growing is dying, and we are growing in terms of the numbers of water bodies. We want to increase our numbers of water bodies from around 10,740 to even more than that, 11,000, 12,000 as we go, so that we climate-proof our agriculture, which is vulnerable to climate change. So at the moment, we have about 9 projects, big, huge projects, I think to the tune of about 1.3, 1.4 billion US dollars. Yes, in terms of dam construction. So that ultimately, yes, I mean, we are the sector leaders for water. Ultimately, we would need to resolve issues around water issues in the cities, water issues in the growth points, water issues in the agriculture space, ultimately. So that's the reason why we are partaking in those, massive and multi-billion dollar projects.
I have to say I'm amazed by the level of awareness regarding the Fumbuza concept. I mean, every time I go to my rural home, all the fields have little holes in them. So we've done very well there. But we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the provision of inputs to those farmers under the Fumbuza scheme, as well as the global compensation agreement, which was recently signed by the government. Back to this one-on-one discussion we are having with the PEMSEC for Agriculture, Dr. John Basera, where we are discussing this ambitious plan by the government to achieve food self-sufficiency by 2023 and an $8 billion agriculture economy by 2025. Dr. Basera, when we went for the break, we were discussing, of course, the Fumbuza concept. And I was saying that people, in terms of awareness, you have done really, really well there. But the rain season is about to start. Where are we in terms of putting together the inputs that farmers need for this program?
Thanks to His Excellence for the support which we are receiving in terms of the provision of inputs, the early provision of inputs. I will come to that. But more importantly, thanks again to the teamwork as ministries, Minister of Information in terms of information dissemination, and thanks to my team, the Agritech team. They are doing an incredible job, and that's the reason why His Excellence had to mobilize and to motorize them in terms of motorcycles, mobility issues, and so on and so on. But let me come back to the issue of one of the key principles in terms of adopting conservation agriculture. There's a reason to that. One of the key principles is obviously issues around timeliness. So timeliness is very, very key for us to be able to religiously adopt conservation agriculture. So now, timeliness in the sense of the operations, the hauling out, that's why you are seeing makomba kucherwa, vanhu vakunganiza mufudze, vanhu vakuisa analime and so on and so on. But more importantly, from our side, like I said, the government is directly supporting 1.8 million, 2 million households, for example. So now, timeliness is of essence. So now, already we have started input distribution. Why? Because we would want to respect that principle for the adoption, for the religious adoption of conservation agriculture, about that issue of timeliness. So you realize that we are going to support those 2 million households with a standard input package, but at the moment, I can report that I think over 50% of the fertilizers have been distributed under the scheme. Yes, and in terms of seed distribution, yes, on seed, we always want to be a little bit careful because seed is a biological living thing. So you wouldn't want to ship it down there, Anamzarabani, down there, those hot areas. Otherwise, it will be deformed, yeah, and its viability will be affected. So in terms of seed distribution, our intention is to say by mid-September, we would have distributed over 50% of the requirements. But more importantly, it's not only where we are respecting that principle of timeliness. It's not only on Pfuvudza, but on all the other programs, like Command Agriculture, that one is coming. We are already at an advanced stage in terms of striking a deal with the respective banks, that is CBZ, as well as Agribank, in terms of financing and administering the Command Agriculture program. But of course, the targets, Gilbert, is about 410,000 hectares under Command Agriculture. But timeliness is very, very key.
PS, you made reference earlier on to the issue of farm mechanization, supporting farmers with equipment they need. And you're very clear that no more free lunches on that aspect. And that is important for Zimbabweans because we don't have a good history. You are aware of the controversial farm mechanization program. But can you be more clear now? What safeguards have been put in place to ensure that we don't have the problems we've had in the past and that people who benefit from these programs will actually use this equipment to produce?
We have some serious gaps in terms of our mechanization levels as a country. For example, our national requirement for tractors is about 35 to 40,000. But alas, Gilbert, currently we have about 10,000 tractors. That's 40%. To make it worse, Gilbert, 30% or 40% of that is non-functional. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of our mechanization efforts. Remember, His Excellency always says that we need to mechanize, we need to modernize our agriculture so that we upscale efficiencies, we upscale competitiveness so that we are able to compete at par with our peers in the region and the world over. So we are rolling out a number of mechanization programs like the John Deere facility, I think to the tune of 51 million US dollars, the Belarus facility, thanks to the efforts by His Excellency in terms of engagements and re-engagements with the Republic of Belarus. So yes, we'll be getting a number of, I think to the tune of 500 tractors, but all in all the mechanization program, including the More Food for Africa, we are targeting to distribute about 2,000 tractors. And we are targeting. Yes, that is this year. And it has to happen. It's never easy, but we have to try our best. And we are trying our best. So far, John Deere facility, it has been commissioned. The Belarus facility, it will be commissioned, I think, by His Excellency in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that one is kind of a done deal. So at least it shows that we are trying our best. We are working in terms of mechanizing our agriculture. But now, the new normal is that there's no more free lunch. There's no more cases whereby us as government, myself as the permanent secretary, will issue out tractors. No, that one is no more. So what we have done is that we have structured some kind of financial structures with banks, including CBZ, including Stanbic, including Agribank. Those banks, they are supporting us big time in terms of our mechanization efforts. So now, the mechanization programs will be administered through these 3 financial services institutions or the banks. So what happens is they are responsible for their KYC, know your customer, for the onboarding of farmers, right? And contracting and loaning, give out the loans or the advances to the farmers. That's their responsibility. Us as government, our role is only to support in terms of extension so that the farmers can be able to perform, to produce, so that they are able to repay. And at the same time, and ultimately, we ensure upscaled recoveries in terms of those schemes. But what we have done again as government, because ideally a financial services institution would demand some form of collateral. Yeah, so that bit is a little bit relaxed.
Going back to the issue of tractors, and the fact that we do not have enough, and of course we are doing something about that particular issue. You remember at the Agribusiness Conference, there was a presentation by Director DDF, Mr. Jonga, who indicated that we secured some tractors, I think the Food for Africa program, Brazil, 2011 and 2015, I think, and somehow these tractors, 400 of them, are said to be lying idle. What's the story there?
Gilbert, I would say that it's actually a learning curve in terms of the implementation modalities of such mechanization programs. As government, it's no longer our role to issue out tractors. Yeah, it's no longer our role. It's now the role of the private sector. Remember, according to the TSP, one of the key dictates in the TSP, Transitional Stabilization Program, is to crowd in the participation of private sector, the financial services institutions. So now, all the programs are now being run and administered by the financial services institutions, the banks. So now, those are some kind of lessons which we have learned. But now, more specifically to those 400 or so tractors, what we have done is that, of course, we are talking with DDF in terms of adopting those, the same tractors, they are refurbished, and then they are put to use, because we have a serious gap in terms of our mechanization levels, Gilbert. But more importantly, let me try to introduce, one of the key and strategic touch points in terms of our mechanization efforts. We created agriculture equipment leasing vehicle under Agribank. And that leasing vehicle will house all the complicated agriculture equipment, like the combine harvesters. Well, a combine harvester is a sophisticated equipment. Even a top farmer may fail to manage a combine harvester. So we put them under a vehicle, so farmers will be able to hire from Agribank. And of course, farmers are now grouped into clusters. For example, in Mashonaland Central, we have the Mazoe Bindura cluster, we have the Shamba cluster, we have the Mvurwi Centenary cluster. If you go to Mash West, we have the Banget Chinoi cluster. We also have the Chegutu Selu cluster. We have the Karoi cluster. So all those clusters will be allocated their own fair share of combine harvesters, and of course administered through Agribank. So now, Agribank, what Agribank will also do is to look for all those idle tractors, the dead or the alive ones, I should say in quotes, and look at a program where those idle tractors are refurbished and put now to use, and put under that special vehicle, and they will now be available for hire to our farmers. Because we would want ultimately to get to a situation whereby a farmer doesn't have to necessarily own a tractor. A farmer doesn't have to necessarily own a combine harvester, but they have to be accessible, they have to be available. Yeah.
The issue of fertilizer is perennially been a challenge for the sector. Looking ahead again to the new season, and thankfully the Met Department is indicating that we can expect no more rainfall. Where are we in terms of fertilizer preparation for the new season?
I would say, according to the presentations from the Fertilizer Manufacturers Association, I think we have a deficit to the tune of over 100,000 metric tons of fertilizers. But we are putting up some structures in place, and of course led by the Honorable Vice President, Vachiwenga, in terms of import substitution for that key agricultural input fertilizer. So we are saying, and going forwards, would need ideally to import all the necessary raw materials, especially in support of our vehicles or our companies, Sebos and Chemblex, around February, March, April, and then May and June. Why? Because that's when, usually that window, that's when the raw materials are at their cheapest cost. So we would want to take advantage because it will have some significant and ripple spillover effects even on the, on the production cost as well as on the food price ultimately. So that's another program which we are working on with Industry and Commerce, and of course led by Honorable Vice President. So we are saying in terms of for this season, the necessary structures through the auction system have been put in place so that the fertilizer manufacturers, the blenders and so on are able to access foreign currency. It's no longer, Forex is no longer an issue thanks to Minister of to Treasury for that initiative, that is the auction system. So all the blenders, fertilizer blenders, the fertilizer manufacturers can be able to access foreign currency so that they are able to buy raw materials on time and for the season. But coming back now more direct to your question, the fertilizer manufacturing capacity in the country, I'm sure you are looking at around over 1 million metric tons per year.
So what's the national requirement?
Well, the national requirements for fertilizers this year, you are looking at around 650, but we are short by, I think, about 100,000. So I'm saying we have enough capacity to manufacture as per our requirements, if and only if we get the much needed foreign currency. But I'm saying that the good news is that the exchange, the auction system is in place and it's working. And it's working very good, so the fertilizer blenders and manufacturers can be able to access forex on that.
Yeah. Yes, just looking back at the legacy issues, the government recently reached a milestone agreement in terms of the former farmers' compensation. It's controversial, but of course it's a constitutional requirement that needs this year to be done. In your view, what are the economic benefits that the country can expect from this agreement?
Well, the GCA, or the Global Compensation Agreement, is not controversial. It's actually constitutional, I should say. Yeah, but us as a sector, us as government, we are happy, and that's why we had to take that route. Because at some point, you would need to respect property rights. So, yes, we are respecting property rights. And you know what it does? It builds confidence. Yeah? So once confidence is built, then you are able to lure appropriate capital at appropriate interest rates and at appropriate patience. Because agriculture is a patient game, and you need patient capital. But for us to be able to lure the patient capital, then we need to make sure that we are constitutional, we observe constitutionalism, we also observe property rights and respect to property rights. So that's what happened, and I'm sure and we are positive that we'll be able to harness more foreign and patient capital into our agriculture sector. So those are the direct economic benefits to the GCA.
The other side to this legacy issue is, of course, the matter of tenure for the resettled farmers. And this has proved very tricky in terms of these farmers accessing finance from banks, because banks have not been very keen to accept the 99-year leases as collateral. What are your plans in terms of dealing with this issue?
We are working on the 9-year lease bankability. That's very, very, very important because obviously agriculture is a patient game. You need patient capital, you need appropriate capital, and obviously the banks ideally would ask for some form of collateral. And we are working and we are at an advanced stage in terms of making the 99-year lease bankable. But more importantly, through His Excellence, we are remodeling Agribank to form or to reintroduce a land bank. That's very, very fundamental. So the land bank, the asset base of the land bank comes from land. Yeah? So overnight, it will become the biggest bank in the country, probably with over 4, 5, or 6 billion US dollar in terms of the asset base. So using that, and coupled with the GCA now, it will be able to lure more capital into the country, the land bank. And of course, using land as the capital base for it to be able to to do such, to lure, more capital, more patient capital for our farmers. But otherwise, one of the key objectives of the Land Bank is obviously to avail capital or finance at appropriate and patient levels to the farming community, because farming is a patient game. You look at agriculture infrastructure, we used to have the AFC, eh? Yeah? And AFC, for your information, Gilbert, it played a very pivotal role in terms of agriculture green revolution #2. Yeah? Remember, we used to have the group lending for the smallholder farmers, yeah, for the A1 farmers. So we'll adopt such kind of a model into AgriBank, and then try to have a land bank to cater for the A2 farmers, for the resettled A2 farmers, to cater for the A1's farmers, to cater for even the communal farmer, because we need to grow together with the communal folk. That's why we say that agriculture is a generous sector. Why? Because it can be pro-poor if well structured, that is.
You have referred to the agricultural revolutions. I mean, you are a scholar of the sector as well. You pointed out the importance of the role of the AFC. But going back again, I think research was also an important part of the sector. You've come from the seed sector, and a lot of the seeds that we are using were a product of that research. Is research a part of what you're trying to do now in terms of turning around the sector?
Precisely. Remember, one of the pronouncements by His Excellency, I think that was around 2018, was that 1% of the national GDP, annual GDP, should go towards research. So yes, we are working out structures so that we are able to get that kind of funding. And like we always say, agriculture takes center stage in terms of our economy. So now, the bulk of it, obviously, as an agriculturalist and as the PEMSEC for agriculture, I would need the larger chunk of it, of that 1%. But more importantly, I'm sure recently, we recently launched a scheme, a mechanization scheme for our research stations. We have over 10 research stations as government in Zimbabwe, and we are mechanizing them, we are modernizing them, we are developing irrigation so that the research efforts are initiated at government level, as well as we also crowd in the private sector, the seedcos of this world, the seed companies, the fertilizer companies. They have to put their skin in the game in terms of research efforts. But let me point out that for us to be able to adapt to climate change and to climate-proof our agriculture, then we need a robust and responsive research. And that research, it has to be supported by government, it has to be supported by the private sector, more importantly, the development agencies and so on and so on. So yes, we are making some concerted efforts in terms of revamping our research into new crops, alternative crops, especially for stock feeds. We are looking at Ana cassava, we are looking at the traditional grains, the research on traditional grains, the agronomy bit, the farming as a business research, new fertilizer formulations, the blends and so forth, the new seed varieties. Remember, we have CBI, Crop Breeding Institute, under this ministry, which is working on climate-proofing agriculture through alternative crops, through climate-smart crops. You are looking at Yonyemba, you are looking at, that is cowpea, by the way, Bambara nuts, and so on and so on. So now we are making some concerted efforts to that effect, and we are also looking at revamping ARC, Agriculture Research Council. It's very important that it plays its part. It takes center stage in terms of leading and coordinating agriculture research in the country.
Exports used to be a key part of our agriculture sector. Tobacco, cotton. Tobacco has come up in terms of crop production. You're also working on cotton, I'm aware. But where are we with respect to horticulture and floriculture, which also used to be a key part of our exports, especially to Europe?
Gilbert, I would need a good session on to discuss horticulture. Yeah. But otherwise, yes, we are working on that, and very soon we'll be launching the horticulture development strategy. I think it's now at an advanced stage, but without preempting, it's targeting to revamp and to upscale our exports. Remember, at our peak, we used to export around 143 million. That's 0.14 billion US dollars per year. We would need to be able to achieve those old glories.
Livestock development is also a key part of this plan. The national herd has gone down due to droughts and diseases. What are we planning to do in that particular sector?
One of the key dictates in the livestock growth plan is obviously to look at, number one, issues to do with animal health. Remember, we have tick-borne induced deaths, like the January disease. So as government, we are working on that. And I think we are positive that as ministry that very soon we won't be having more deaths in terms of the January disease. So we are rolling out a blitz tick grease program, because for us to be able to contain January disease and other tick-borne diseases, related diseases, then we need to have a robust dipping regime for the next 1.5 to 2 years. So what we are doing is that we are rolling out a program called Blitz Tick Grease Program, whereby we are supporting over 1 million households. This one, it has to come from public expenditure, because we are looking at smallholder farmers with 2 cows, 3 cows, and so on and so on. So we are supporting it direct as government. So we are saying we will support each of those 1 million households with a 1 kilo or 1 kg of tick grease. Remember, tick grease normally is applied on the tick feeding sites. You are looking at, I don't know, kanamobezina knows my armpits. Yeah, we are looking at under the tail, at the tail brush, in the ears, so you apply. So what it means is that if you apply for tick grease on your animal, then it will be covered for the next foreseeable future, say a month or so. So that's the reason why we are rolling out that program. Why? Because most of our deep tanks, they are kind of, to some extent, dilapidated. But we are also making some concerted efforts, especially rehabilitating the same. Remember, we have about 4,000, I think more specifically 3,900 deep tanks, but 2,600 are not functional at the moment. So that signifies, I think, about 55% or if not more. So now we are saying we need to rehabilitate those. But how are we going to rehabilitate those? We are going to work together with the communities. Yeah, because remember, there has to be some extreme ownership for those public infrastructures to last. So we are working with the communities. We are saying, and of course the development agencies, that is the development world, in terms of resuscitating, revamping, revitalizing the dilapidated or the non-functional dips. But we're also looking at the sprayers, especially the solar-powered sprayers, and we're also looking at, through Zinwa, drilling bores near all those dip tanks, because you realize that one of the challenges is that a dip tank is there, but there's no water source. So we are looking at that. Unfortunately, we do have Zinwa under the ministry. Yeah, so that we can easily do. But we're also looking at improved animal nutrition. Remember, a significant proportion of the animal deaths or the livestock deaths is caused by nutrition issues, feed and stock feed issues. So we are looking at that, and we are rolling out a program specifically along the major rivers, where we have a 1 kilometer span of pastures, whereby the communities can now send their animals for grazing. But it has to be some kind of structured and on a rotational basis. So that program, we are doing it with ZAGP. It's that is supported by EU and other development agencies. So as government, we also want to roll out that. But we are also, and more importantly, looking at what we call the livestock survival rations. The livestock survival rations, they are based on on-farm formulations. So we are looking at such crops like cassava.
So farmers will grow this?
Yes, farmers will grow this and then make their own formulations. Probably government will come in here and there with the concentrates and so on, the protein sources and so on. So we are looking at cassava. I will explain why cassava. We are also looking at cowpea. Why those 2 crops? These 2 crops, they are climate smart. Any household anywhere in Zimbabwe can be able to grow these 2 crops.
Any of the regions you can grow?
Any of the regions. Even if there was region 6, somebody would even grow in region 6. The driest parts of can still grow the 2 crops, so that we make the livestock survival rations. Why cassava? More importantly, cassava, even if poorly grown, if poorly managed, you can still yield in the upwards of 15 tons per hectare.
Is this program already underway, or you are looking to launch it?
It will be launched, I think, in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yes, it will be launched, but we are now at an advanced stage in terms of the procurement of the tickets and so on and so on. Yes.
Lastly, as I said earlier, the President has said that mining and agriculture will be at the heart of the country's economic turnaround program. He also said that your colleagues in mining are on course to achieve their targets well ahead of time.
We are also on course, and thanks to his support. Remember, he supported us with 5,000 motorcycles. And I remember vividly, one weekend, we went to his farm. I think I was with the late Honorable, and we said, Chef, for us to be able to transform this agriculture, then we need a robust and responsive extension system, a motorized extension system. And they said, don't worry, you get 5,000. So it was on a weekend. And I remember at the next event, I think it was to do with a presidential piggery program, he said, you are getting the 5,000. He announced that. And then 2 weeks down the line, we got the first batch of 500 motorcycles. We are getting the other batches, I think, in the very, very near future. And at the moment, we are in the process of training our extensionists in terms of motorcycle riding. But more importantly, on the softer side, the softer skills. I mean, we are looking at the mindset. We are also motorizing their minds. We are physically motorizing them, but we are also motorizing their minds. So I should say, with that extension efforts, as well as efforts in irrigation development, urban development, the mechanization programs, but again, and more importantly, the very generous presidential input scheme, the Fumvudza scheme, I'm sure we are on course to achieve the set target. Number one, the set target to ensure that by year 2023, we don't import a single grain of either soya, traditional grains, or maize. That one we are on course, very much on course. To put agriculture at the center stage of achieving Vision 2030, that one I think we are very, very much on course. Well, it will never be easy, but we just have to try our best. And in fact, our new creed as a ministry, with my people, with my team, is that we have come so far. We have done so much, but we have so much more work to do. We will try our best, and we will achieve our goals of getting or putting agriculture at the center stage of achieving Vision 2030. So, Your Excellency, yes, we are on course. Gilbert, yes, we are on course.
Yes, if we are still importing food by 2023, you will have no less an office to answer to than the highest in the land. All the best, and thank you very much for finding the time to talk to us about the agriculture recovery plan.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. Thank you, viewers.